My sister called the cops on me for refusing to babysit, but the CPS investigation revealed the dark truth about her parenting. I, 30M, found myself in a whirlwind of drama that started with what I assumed was a small decision. I refused to babysit my sister's child on a particular day. That refusal ignited a chain reaction I never saw coming. My sister actually called the cops on me for abandoning her son. Then Child Protective Services, CPS, got involved, unearthing dark truths about her parenting that nobody expected. In the end, I was forced to confront issues in my family that I'd ignored for far too long. First, some background. My sister is in her mid-20s, and we grew up in what most would call a typical suburban family. I'm older by about 5 years. When she was born, the focus in the house shifted from me to her, but I didn't mind, at least not at first. As she grew, her knack for manipulation became apparent. She'd throw a tantrum if she didn't get what she wanted, and our parents usually caved. Our father would insist she needed more attention because she was younger, and our mother would urge me to be a good big brother. Over time, she internalized the idea that the world revolved around her desires. By my teen years, tension had already set in. I got a part-time job to cover my own expenses, while my sister did practically nothing around the house. Any chores assigned to her magically became my responsibility if she whined enough. I tried not to stir conflict, so I swallowed my resentment. But her sense of entitlement only grew. Things took a serious turn when she got pregnant a couple of years ago. The baby's father disappeared from the picture quickly. With little financial stability, my parents stepped in, giving her a place to stay and covering most of her expenses. They essentially raised my nephew for her. I occasionally helped by babysitting. Initially, it wasn't a big deal. I loved my nephew, but my sister soon began calling me constantly to watch him. She'd make it sound like a 2-hour favor, but then disappear for an entire day, never apologizing. If I dared to say no, she labeled me selfish, and our parents would pressure me to support your sister. A few months back, I had an important work commitment, an all-day training that I couldn't skip. My sister called at dawn, demanding I watch my nephew because she had errands. I told her it wasn't possible. She exploded, calling me worthless. For once, I held firm, telling her my schedule was non-negotiable. She hung up, and I thought the matter ended there, until the police knocked on my door a couple of hours later. The officer said my sister reported I'd agreed to babysit but abandoned the child. I was stunned. I showed him my call logs and explained I'd explicitly refused. He quickly saw there was no evidence to support her claim. He did caution me that, since a minor was involved, a routine CPS notification was mandatory, even if the allegation seemed baseless. I felt furious and betrayed, but I figured everything would blow over once CPS realized my sister had lied. What I didn't know was that CPS would discover something far more serious when they checked her home. This whole situation turned from a false police report into a full-scale investigation of her parenting. And the more CPS probed, the darker the revelations about my sister's neglect and irresponsibility became. Soon enough, I heard from my mother that a CPS worker visited my sister's apartment and found it in chaos. Piles of dirty dishes, half-eaten food everywhere, trash strewn about, and my nephew's bedroom so cluttered it was hazardous. Worse, they noted unexplained bruises on my nephew's arm, which my sister brushed off as playground injuries. At first, my sister tried spinning a story that I had orchestrated the CPS drama to get back at her for the false police call. She even phoned me to blame me for ruining her life by not babysitting that day, claiming none of this would have happened otherwise. Her logic was absurd. She made the false report, not me. I refused to accept her guilt-tripping, and that enraged her further. As CPS dug deeper, they also interviewed her parents and me. My parents tried defending her, saying she was overwhelmed, but the social worker seemed unimpressed, demanding real evidence that my sister could provide a safe environment. My nephew was often at my parents' place anyway, but the worker needed to see consistent, reliable childcare or a stable household for him. My sister lacked both. Meanwhile, my father asked me to step up and babysit, so my sister could demonstrate to CPS that she had a robust support system. He framed it like I needed to rescue my nephew from the possibility of foster care. While I adore my nephew, I was still furious that my sister had put me in this mess by lying to the police. I told my father that enabling her might just reinforce her destructive habits. He felt frustrated that I wouldn't simply comply. Then my sister falsely told CPS I previously agreed to be her full-time babysitter, which explained her messy home. She claimed she was expecting me to manage the child more often. I had the evidence to refute that: texts, call logs, family members' statements. So when CPS interviewed me formally, I presented everything. I recounted how I'd helped babysit occasionally, but I'd never committed to anything full-time, especially not on the day she called the police. I also mentioned incidents where she left my nephew in risky situations, like leaving him in a car while she ran into a store for just a minute, which turned out much longer. It wasn't only me who noticed her neglect. An aunt reached out, revealing she'd seen my sister leave my nephew unsupervised by a hotel pool during a family reunion. She admitted feeling guilty for not reporting it sooner. My sister's sense of entitlement had gone unchecked for years, and now an innocent child was caught in the middle. Her behavior escalated further. She threatened to defame me, threatened more false police reports, and insisted it was my duty to rescue her from CPS. That only proved to the authorities and the rest of our family that she had no real intention of changing or taking responsibility. Meanwhile, tension in the household soared. My mother tried to push for a family meeting, hoping we'd placate my sister so she'd calm down and keep custody. But I was done protecting her from the consequences of her own actions. At this family meeting, my sister demanded that I publicly promise to back her custody claim by telling CPS she was a competent mother and that I was fully committed to babysitting whenever she needed. She wanted me to be her alibi. My mother begged me to at least do it for the child's sake. My father echoed that, urging me to keep my nephew out of foster care. But I refused to lie. I told him all that enabling her manipulations wasn't going to fix anything. As we argued, my sister's phone buzzed. She checked it, went pale, then angrily told everyone the CPS worker had more evidence of her neglect, allegedly from neighbors who saw my nephew wandering around alone. My father and mother looked shaken. They finally realized this wasn't just a minor spat, but a serious issue involving potential child endangerment. My sister, however, refused to admit any wrongdoing. She insisted we were all conspiring to portray her as a terrible parent. I repeated I wouldn't lie to CPS just to shield her from consequences. After that heated meeting, my sister's wrath turned on me full force. She posted on social media, accusing me of destroying the family and wanting her child taken away. Some relatives tried to shame me, claiming I was making everything worse by not helping. Others sided with me, saying they'd long suspected my sister couldn't properly care for my nephew. Meanwhile, the CPS investigation persisted. They interviewed neighbors, discovered consistent neglect, and eventually concluded my sister was unfit for full custody. They decided to place my nephew under temporary guardianship with my parents until my sister could meet specific requirements like parenting classes and stable employment. My sister's response was to lash out even more. She filed a small civil complaint accusing me of slander, alleging I'd told people she was an unfit mother. My attorney friend reviewed her filing and said it was baseless. Truth is an absolute defense in defamation cases, and plenty of eyewitnesses confirmed her negligence. Nonetheless, dealing with the paperwork was stressful. We countered by pointing to her false police report. My attorney argued that we could press a malicious prosecution angle, or at least document how she'd repeatedly abused the legal system. Realizing I was prepared to fight back, my sister withdrew her complaint. But by then, my nephew was already placed under our parents' care. My sister turned all her fury at me, calling me a traitor who betrayed family. I refused to take her calls. It hurt to see my nephew caught in the crossfire, but I also recognized that letting her blame me for everything wouldn't solve his problems or keep him safe. Shortly after my sister withdrew her complaint, the CPS case concluded with an official arrangement. My parents had temporary guardianship, and my sister only had supervised visitation. She read about the system being corrupt and pinned the blame on me. However, people around us realized she was the architect of her own downfall. If she hadn't lied to the police about me abandoning her son, none of this would have escalated the way it did. Legally, I felt vindicated. The false police report was on record. While the district attorney didn't file criminal charges against her for it, the documentation helped me show that she was prone to lying under stress. She lost a chunk of credibility in both the social sphere and the eyes of CPS. I also kept all receipts and call logs in case she tried anything else. For once, she seemed to back down, probably because she couldn't afford more legal fights. My nephew is doing better under my parents' care. He's calmer, has a routine, and is no longer in constant chaos. My parents, though they initially tried to push me to help my sister, now see the severity of her issues. They acknowledged how enabling her for so long led to this crisis. They still love my sister, of course, but they can't excuse her reckless behavior. As for me, I maintain a close relationship with my nephew, visiting regularly, offering him stability. The heartbreak is that his own mother is missing for his daily life due to her own misguided choices. Every now and then, my sister tries to stir up new drama, complaining on social media about how the family sided with me to take her kid away. But few buy that narrative anymore. The neighbors' testimonies, the CPS findings, and her own meltdown are well known among those who matter. People see through her manipulations. Looking back, refusing to babysit on that day feels like a small trigger for a much bigger revelation. My decision forced everything into the open, her neglect, her entitlement, and her willingness to lie to the authorities just to shift blame. My father told me once, maybe you could have just watched him that one day. But I believe we'd have ended here eventually regardless. This fiasco forced an overdue reckoning. If she changes and regains custody by genuinely improving, I'll support that for my nephew's sake. But I won't lie or shield her from consequences again. Ultimately, I see it as a harsh lesson. Sometimes standing your ground on a seemingly minor point exposes deep-rooted problems. My sister's meltdown was about more than a babysitting refusal. It was about years of enabling and unchallenged behavior. By refusing to comply, I inadvertently triggered a chain reaction that laid everything bare. It's painful, but at least now my nephew is safer and the truth is out. I can only hope she learns from this and tries to become a better mother. Until then, I remain steadfast in my refusal to be her scapegoat. I'll continue to protect my nephew's interests and let my sister face the reality of her choices. And that, in itself, might be the best form of revenge I never intended, making her confront the consequences she's always avoided.